A modern container ship is one of the largest moving objects humans have ever built. A wall of steel stacked 10 stories high with cargo, sailing straight into storms that would swallow a small town. And you'd think the way it survives is by being impossibly strong and rigid. It isn't. These ships survive by bending, by flexing like a diving board in the waves. And the thing most likely to kill one isn't some giant rogue wave crashing over the bow. It's an invisible rhythm in the water that most sailors never see coming. This is the engineering behind how the biggest ships on Earth stay afloat, and the hidden weakness that keeps sinking them. It starts with a simple idea. The ship is a giant girder. To understand how these ships survive, forget everything you picture about a boat. Engineers don't think of a container ship as a vessel. They think of it as one enormous steel beam floating on water. A box girder, hundreds of meters long. And here's why that matters. When a big wave lifts the middle of the ship while the bow and stern hang over open water, the whole hull tries to bend upward in the center. Engineers call this hogging. A moment later, the wave passes, and now the two ends are being lifted while the middle drops into the trough. The hull bends the other way. That's called sagging. Out in a real storm, a ship does this over and over, thousands of times a day. Hogging, sagging, hogging, sagging. And the forces are worst of all when the length of the wave matches the length of the ship, because then the whole hull is caught at the exact wrong angle. So how do you stop a 400-meter steel box from snapping in half? Two things. The first is the shape of that girder. The strong steel is concentrated up at the deck and down at the very bottom of the hull, because those are the parts doing the real work when the ship bends. The wider you spread that steel top to bottom, the harder the hull is to bend. Naval architects have a number for this, the section modulus, and classification rules set a legal minimum for it. Fall below it, and the ship never gets to sail. The second thing is the steel itself. As these ships got bigger, ordinary shipbuilding steel would have made the hull so heavy it could barely carry cargo. So the industry developed a high-tensile steel called YP47, with a yield strength of 460 newtons per square millimeter, about 20% stronger than the standard grade. It was first used on a giant container ship in 2007, and on the most punished parts of the hull, the upper deck and the tops of the cargo openings, it can be up to 100 millimeters thick. That's a slab of solid steel as thick as a brick is long.
But thickness alone isn't enough. And this is where it gets unsettling. When you use steel this strong and this thick, a single crack becomes terrifying. If a fracture starts and begins to run, it can travel through the steel at around 1,000 meters per second. That's faster than a rifle bullet. A crack like that could split a ship almost instantly. So builders weld in special brittle crack arrest steel, designed to catch a running crack and stop it dead before it tears the whole hull apart. Underneath all that cargo, the ship also has a double bottom. Two complete layers of steel hull, one inside the other, with a honeycomb of girders between them. Run aground and tear the outer skin, and the inner skin still keeps the ocean out. It also acts as the bottom flange of that giant girder, giving the ship enormous strength along its length. And none of this is left to the shipbuilder's judgment alone. Independent organizations called classification societies, names like DNV, Lloyd's Register, and ABS, write the rulebook for how strong every part of the hull has to be, and they inspect the ships to enforce it. So, on paper, the girder is solved. The ship can hog, it can sag, it can flex through a storm,
and hold together. But container ships have a weakness built into their very shape, a weakness no other type of cargo ship has to worry about. And to see it, you just have to look down at the deck. Here's the problem. To load a container ship, cranes drop the boxes straight down into the holds through huge openings that run almost the entire width of the deck. It's efficient. It's how you fill a ship with 20,000 containers in a couple of days. But structurally, it means the top of that steel girder has a giant slot cut out of it, running most of the length of the ship. In some places, there's only about half a meter of deck left between the cargo opening and the edge of the hull. Think about twisting a cardboard tube. Solid, it resists you. But cut a long slit down the side and suddenly it twists like nothing. That's exactly what those deck openings do to a container ship. They make the hull good at bending, but weak against twisting. And the ocean loves to twist a ship. When waves come at an angle, or when the cargo is loaded a little heavier on one side than the other, the whole hull wants to wind up like a spring. This creates a special kind of stress that concentrates in the corners of those deck openings. And that's exactly where fatigue cracks tend to appear first, at the hatch corners. Engineers fight back with heavily reinforced deck edges, thicker steel, and rounded, radiused corners that spread the stress instead of letting it pile up in one spot. But the vulnerability never fully goes away. It's the price of building a ship you can load from the top. Now add the sea into the mix, and not just any sea. For centuries, sailors told stories of walls of water that came out of nowhere. Waves so tall they towered over the ship before crashing down. Scientists dismissed them as exaggeration, fishermen's tall tales. Then, on New Year's Day, 1995, an oil platform in the North Sea called Draupner recorded one. A laser instrument pointed at the water measured a single wave 25.6 meters high, rising in a sea where the waves around it were less than half that size. It was the first time a monster wave, a genuine rogue wave, was ever confirmed by a scientific instrument. The legends were real. These rogue waves can form when smaller waves stack on top of each other at the same instant, briefly combining into one giant. They can form when a swell runs into a powerful ocean current that squeezes the waves together, like the notorious Agulhas current off the coast of South Africa. And they can grow out of the physics of the ocean itself, where a normal wave train becomes unstable and dumps its energy into a single towering peak. When a ship meets seas like this, the punishment comes in different forms. There's slamming, when the bow lifts clear of the water and crashes back down like a hammer. There's green water, solid ocean coming straight over the bow and landing on the deck cargo. And there's a whip through the entire hull after a big impact, a vibration that adds even more stress on top of everything else. Survive all of that, and you'd think the worst is behind you. But the deadliest threat to a container ship isn't the biggest wave. It's not even a violent one. It's a rhythm, a resonance that can build in seas that look almost calm and flip a fully loaded ship on its side in under a minute. That's what we need to talk about next. Everyone knows how to make a swing go higher. You pump your legs at just the right moment in time with the swing. Small pushes, perfectly timed, build into a huge arc. That's resonance. And a container ship in the wrong sea can become a 200,000-ton swing. Here's how it happens. A ship's stability, its stubborn urge to stay upright, depends partly on the shape of the hull at the waterline. When a wave crest passes along the middle of the ship, the hull sits differently in the water, and that stability briefly drops. When the trough passes, stability comes back. Now, if the waves are timed just right, roughly one stability dip for every half swing of the ship's natural roll, each dip gives the roll a little push, exactly like pumping a swing. The ship starts rolling. The rolling pumps energy into itself. Within just a handful of waves, a gentle 5-degree roll can explode into a violent 30 or 40 degrees to each side. And the terrifying part is that this can happen in a head sea or a following sea, with waves coming straight at the bow or straight from behind, where a captain would never expect to be thrown around at all.
This is parametric rolling, and it is the signature killer of container ships. The world learned its name the hard way in October 1998. A post-Panamax container ship called the APL China was crossing the North Pacific through a brutal storm. Out on the open ocean, the ship began to roll. Not gently. Reports put the rolling at around 35 to 40 degrees, so violent that stacks of containers were torn apart. When the APL China finally limped into port, around 400 of its roughly 4,000 containers were gone, swept into the sea, and many more were crushed and mangled. At the time, it was the largest container loss claim in history, and it forced the entire industry to take a phenomenon that had lived mostly in textbooks and treat it as a deadly, real-world threat. So, why can't they just design it away? Because the very thing that controls parametric rolling is a trade-off with no perfect answer. It comes down to a measurement called GM, the metacentric height, which sets how stiffly a ship resists rolling. Load a ship to be very stiff with a high GM and it snaps upright fast, but that quick, jerky motion is brutal on the cargo and the lashings. Load it to be tender with a low GM and it rolls slow and easy, but it's closer to instability. And crucially, that same number sets the ship's natural roll rhythm, the exact timing that determines whether a given sea can start pumping the swing. Get the loading wrong for the conditions, and you've tuned your ship to resonate with the ocean. Which raises the real question. When a ship is rolling 40 degrees in the middle of the Pacific, what is actually holding 20,000 containers to the deck? The answer is a system of steel that most people have never heard of. And when it fails all at once. Below deck, containers have it easy. They drop into vertical steel channels called cell guides, rails that hold each stack locked in place from all 4 sides. The boxes barely have to hold themselves up. The ship's structure does it for them. But up on the open deck, there are no walls. Just stacks of steel boxes, 6, 7, 8 high, exposed to every wave and every roll. And keeping them there is a layered system of hardware, each piece doing one job. First, the twist locks. These sit in the corner fittings between every stacked box, and with a quarter turn, they lock each container to the one below it. They stop the boxes from lifting apart and from sliding off each other. Some are locked by hand, and the newer ones snap shut automatically the moment a container is set down. Then come the lashing rods, long steel bars that run at an angle from the ship's structure up to the corners of the containers, tensioned tight by turnbuckles you crank by hand. On modern ships, the crews work from tall steel structures between the stacks, called lashing bridges, which let them secure the boxes 2 or 3 tiers up without dangling over the side. And every single load path runs through the corner castings, the 8 cast steel blocks at the corners of every container. Every twist lock, every lashing rod, every stacked box above, it all pulls and pushes through these 8 points.
They are the anchors of the entire system. Now, here's what most people get wrong. They picture the deck stack as one rigid, bolted-down block. It isn't. The whole thing is designed to flex. There are deliberate small gaps in the fittings, so when the ship rolls, the lashing rods take the strain first, and only as the stack leans over do the twist locks come tight. The entire deck cargo actually sways and works in a heavy sea. It has to, or it would tear itself apart. But that flex has limits, and they're written down in hard numbers. As the ship rolls and pitches, the forces try to shear the boxes sideways, a motion called racking, and try to tip and separate the stacks. The rules cap these forces precisely. A container's sideways racking limit sits around 150 kilonewtons. The compression a corner post can take before it crumples is around 848 kilonewtons, the weight of dozens of cars pressing down on a single steel corner. Push past these limits and the boxes themselves start to fail. And there's one more factor, maybe the most human of all. For years, shippers routinely lied about how much their containers weighed, sometimes by huge margins. A stack planned for one weight might really be carrying far more, throwing off the ship's stability and overloading the lashings without anyone knowing. It got bad enough that in 2016 a global rule kicked in, requiring every packed container to have a verified weight before it's allowed on board. Because when the weights are wrong, the plan is wrong, the stability is wrong, the lashing calculations are wrong, and nobody finds out until the ship is in a storm, rolling hard, and the numbers stop adding up. So what actually happens when this whole system, the girder, the lashings, the stability, all reaches its breaking point at once? For that, we have to go back to some of the worst days in modern shipping. June 17th, 2013. The Indian Ocean. A container ship called the MOL Comfort, carrying more than 7,000 containers, did the thing every naval architect designs against. A crack tore across the bottom of the hull, ran up both sides, and the ship broke cleanly in two. Both halves drifted, then sank into water miles deep. It remains the worst container ship loss in history. When investigators dug into it, they concluded the forces on the hull had exceeded what its structure could ultimately withstand. And the direct result was a tightening of the very rules that govern how strong these hulls have to be. A disaster rewrote the rulebook. But most container losses aren't the ship snapping in half. They're the deck cargo going over the side. In January 2019, the MSC Zoe lost 342 containers in a storm over shallow water in the North Sea, spilling cargo across a protected coastline and triggering one of the biggest cleanup efforts the region had ever seen. And then the one that still haunts the industry. November 30th, 2020. The one Apus, a 14,000 container ship crossing the Pacific, hit heavy weather and lost around 1,816 containers in a matter of minutes. The leading suspected cause was the invisible rhythm we talked about, parametric rolling. It was the largest loss of its kind since the MOL Comfort broke apart. Now, here's the thing worth holding on to. On any given day, this system works almost perfectly. Out of roughly 250 million containers shipped across the oceans, just 576 were lost in 2024. The losses are astonishingly rare. But they come in sudden, catastrophic clusters, and a single bad day can throw more than 1,000 boxes into the sea.
And where do those containers go? Not neatly to the bottom and not bobbing on the surface like buoys. A packed box can float just beneath the waves for weeks or months, a nearly invisible hazard to smaller vessels, its walls sometimes as thin as a couple of millimeters, slowly leaking cargo into the sea before it finally sinks into the dark. So, after all of this, how do these ships actually survive? The most powerful tool isn't a piece of hardware at all, it's a decision. The single best defense against parametric rolling is for the crew to change the ship's speed or turn to a new heading, breaking the deadly timing with the waves before the rolling can build. Weather routing steers ships around the worst seas entirely, and when a captain feels that first unnatural roll in a following sea, acting fast can stop a disaster before it starts. The hardware helps too. Long fins called bilge keels run down the side of almost every hull to dampen the roll. Some ships carry tanks of water that slosh to counteract rolling. But the giant fin stabilizers you see on cruise ships mostly aren't practical at this scale, so the biggest box ships lean on good seamanship and smart loading more than any gadget. And the newest ships are getting smarter. Sensors watch the stress in the hull and the motion of the vessel in real time, and warning systems are being built to alert the bridge that the ship is drifting into that dangerous rhythm, in time to do something about it. After studying 44 major incidents involving nearly 10,000 lost containers, the industry's biggest safety project pointed straight back at parametric rolling and issued a blunt warning to mariners everywhere. Beware the rolling in following seas. So the next time you see one of these steel giants stacked impossibly high and heading out into the open ocean, remember what's really keeping it together. Not brute strength, not some invincible hull. It's a careful balance of a flexing steel girder, thousands of pieces of hardware working in tension, honest math about weight and stability, and a crew that knows when to slow down and turn. The ocean doesn't sink these ships with one giant wave. It waits for the one moment the balance slips. And most of the time, thanks to more than a century of hard-won engineering, that moment never comes. If you want to see more of the engineering that holds our world together, the machines most people never think twice about, subscribe and stick around. Because there's always a hidden system keeping the impossible afloat.